Thank you for joining me, James Wright. You've got quite a story with regard to how you arrived at your revelations of Freemasonry in the United States and secret societies in general. Give my viewers and listeners some background on you and how you arrived at where you are now.
Where I am now? Well, let's see. In 2010, I was brought aboard as an executive assistant at the Dallas Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, downtown at 500 Harwood Street. Previous to that, I had been a Mason since 2004. I was initiated in a little lodge on Forest Lane in Dallas called John Elder Grazier. And I was pushed into that by my family because it was a family tradition, as it is in most cases with guys that join. Not always, but the majority.
Understood.
And up until that time, I had enjoyed sort of a nice journey, incident-free, definitely revered as sort of a poster child, given who my family was and my then getting involved, and that is why they brought me on board to that position, which was a paid position by the Supreme Council in Washington, D.C. And
okay, James, let me just ask you briefly, if you don't mind, and if you do mind, let me know, but could you talk a little bit about your family and how far back they go in the American Freemasonic movement and what their role was?
Well, through my grandmother, her maiden name was Ellis, as in Ellis County, Texas. And previous to that, it seems like my family specifically has always been kind of matriarchally
Gotcha, sure.
run. And so last names do tend to change, hence like mine being Wright. That's neither here nor there. But my grandmother being an Ellis, she goes back directly into what is known as the John Henry Dillard line, which is a famous Alamo fighter who died there, which then in turn makes me a member of the Sons of the Republic of Texas. Now, that's that side of the family. The other side, they come down directly out of the Spencers of Althorpe, where Princess Diana.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So we've
always. So you trace back to royalty, and are you related to the Bushes?
Yes, in that John Henry Dillard line I just spoke of, going back down to where I said Ellis, my grandmother's grandfather. No, my grandfather's father. Grandmother's father. Had a brother who was subsequently now George W.'s grandfather.
Okay.
So there is a close relation, yes.
And this brings up also a broad question here, which is how important are family heritages and bloodlines, if you will, in U.S. Establishment? I mean, is this something, because we conventionally think of the United States as a republic that by which anyone can rise up, by pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and making a life for themselves. We don't necessarily think of ourselves as an aristocratic society like Europe kind of is, and certainly much of the rest of the world is, where you've got families that, however they go about, they gain power, they preserve their power through marriages and through influential positions. And that can go back hundreds, thousands of years. I mean, is that something that's going on in the United States? And do you have any information on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have the genealogy, which is actually accessible online. And again, through the Ellises, they married also into the Rockefellers. My grandmother, Muriel, her will even states that, or names us as the beneficiaries in it, as, quote, heirs at law of John D. Rockefeller.
Wow. You should be rolling in dough.
Should be. I'm trying to unravel that enigma actually as we speak. That's why I'm in Dallas from Los Angeles at the moment.
Okay, and I think that I've also read that every American president is descended at some level from William the Conqueror, except for one. There's only one president that is not. Do you know who that is?
I'm wanting to say Alexander Hamilton.
He wasn't president. I'm talking president.
Oh, president.
Yeah,
Well, why? What name are you thinking?
it's one president, Martin Van Buren,
Oh, Martin. Well,
because he was Dutch and he was not. Every other president, including Obama. I don't know about Trump though, because I read this before Trump was president. So maybe he is, maybe he isn't. He probably is, but who knows? Anyway, the point is that
even Martin Van Buren is debatable because he came out of the Wiseman family, which is also directly tied into that.
okay.
I've made this claim before, and I'll make it again. When it gets down to like primary season, you can always, or rather, I can always predict who will be elected based on running their genealogy and seeing who has the closest ties, as in like third, fourth, fifth, whatever, cousin to the British royal family. I proved this actually during the last primary. I was working on the Bernie Sanders campaign out of the Hollywood office. And even though I was working on that campaign, and even though I wanted to see Bernie win, I knew in the back of my mind that Trump was going to get it. Why? Because Trump's mother was the previous head of Clan MacLeod in Scotland, which is even more interesting when you factor in that Justin Trudeau, the current Prime Minister of Canada, his mother's maiden name was Sinclair. So we can arrive at a conclusion that currently, as we speak, the entire North American continent is under the leadership of Scottish clans.
Right, and I understand that Sinclair is a very significant and even slightly sinister family name going way back. So we have, I don't think it's controversial for me to say that the United States was founded on Masonic principles, and that President Washington was a major Mason at the Alexandria Lodge. The city of Washington was laid out on Masonic architectural diagrams, and that this played a role in American history. But when I look at American history and I look at our republic and I look at how things have developed, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we're the greatest society in history. What is this Masonic influence, however? I mean, and how pervasive is it, and how does it translate for the rest of us, people like me who are on the outside of it?
Whew, that's a loaded question. Okay.
Okay.
Well, there's currently a disconnect in American Freemasonry, which I should emphasize, not European Freemasonry. They seem to be very much so still on the ball with the way things were. But meanwhile, over in America, there's a disconnect because there's been an infiltration from other secret societies, remnants of the Illuminati out of Bavaria.
Sure.
And they seek to basically throw all of that in the garbage and allow for them to, if you will, social climb up into that hierarchy. This is what the current nefarious agenda playing out at the Scottish Rite is. That's why they would have sought to target me and get rid of me as an executive in that capacity, because it does not suit the current purpose of transforming it into, shall one say, a business-only interest, an investment property, however you want to look at that.
Okay. I want to get into that, your actual story in a minute, but I still want to develop a little history here. You say that the Illuminati influenced or infiltrated Masonic lodges, and I think that's also something that's not even controversial in Europe anyway, and that there were two major Masonic organizations that exist. So they have the Scottish Rite and the Grand Orient. At least that's what I've been told, and that the Illuminati, which was set up May 1st, 1776, by Adam Weishaupt, who was a dissident Jesuit, and it was mainly made up of dissenting Jesuits, that they used as a strategy the infiltration of Masonic lodges. They would become members of Masonic lodges, and then they'd work their way into the inner portico and take over these lodges. Now, they were exposed in 1789 because one of their couriers was arrested on his way to delivering documents. Those documents, that led to Weishaupt, Adam Weishaupt, the founder, being exiled from Bavaria. He spent the rest of his life in a principality in the Holy Roman Empire, continuing to write books, continuing to have influence. And the documents made their way into a book by Abbe Baruel, which was the origins of Jacobinism and the French Revolution. So the ideas that were in those documents and the ideas of the Illuminati became public in Europe, and there was a major reaction against them. And in a nutshell, those ideas were that all of the principalities and the aristocracies would have to be overthrown. All of the church fathers, the Catholic Church in particular, but Protestant churches as well, would have to be overthrown, and that the goal was to create a one world order, an ant colony where everybody would be de facto equal. Very much what Marx talked about in his manifesto of 1848. So George Washington received a letter from someone in the United States, a Mr. Snyder, I don't know who that was, saying that he wasn't concerned about whether or not the Illuminati had infiltrated his lodge. And Washington sent back a letter, which is available at the Library of Congress, in which he said he is very well aware of the diabolical designs, as he called it, of the Illuminati, but he was also convinced that this aspect did not infiltrate his lodge. So I guess my question is, did eventually the Illuminati ideas, at least, if not the Illuminati personnel, make their way across the Atlantic and infiltrate the American Masonic system?
Yes, absolutely. You actually took my next talking point right away from me. Back at that time, that was a moment in history when Freemasonry and public walked hand in hand and enjoyed a very, I would say, constructive relationship. That's when Masonry was out in the open, and there's all sorts of paintings to back that up. Even, for example, sorry, my Siri is eavesdropping.
No, that's okay. Have to pull the plug out from that. I mean, yeah, my daughter warned me about that when we got that. Anyway, go on.
He, like you, for example, you have a mural, I believe, on the ceiling of the Senate building. It's either Congress or Senate, I forget which, but it's called The Apotheosis of George Washington. And what that is supposed to signify is that because of his Masonic wherewithal, that upon his death he achieved some sort of godhood. And I think a lot of Masons would like to believe that, because they believe in the concept of a great architect of the universe over just, say, how we understand God to be. Mm-hmm. And they understand, rather than a concept of, say, heaven or an afterlife, as a great lodge of the universe, and that only the elect, the high-degreed Masons ever get there, which I'm sure many theologians would adamantly disagree with good reason. However, after that, going into the 1800s, this is when Masonry in America started to sort of go out of control, and you had events like the assassination of William Morgan.
All right, I want to get into that in a minute, but I don't know if there's evidence that Washington himself agreed with any of that. I mean, Washington, if you look at his letters, he was a Christian. He was a praying man. He didn't, I don't know if he put that much importance on his Masonic lodge. Maybe he was there more on the outer portico. He might have been there for social reasons. He might have been there to make contact. I know probably certainly Masonic lodges, I think, helped the American Revolution. In Boston, you had the Society of the Green Dragon, which I think was Masonic, that led the Boston Tea Party. And, they were patriotic groups. I mean, they wanted to create an independent republic. So I don't know if I would say that there was anything untoward about that. I mean, the problem with it is that because Masonry is secretive, we don't know. I mean, we don't know what really was going on. All we can look at is his public life, his writings, his public actions. But this gets to a crux of a problem, of course, which is that it's troubling to me that public officials, particularly, would be taking these oaths and joining secret societies where they put the loyalty of that society over that of perhaps of their own country, even their own families. And I don't know if Washington did that, but I know that this, to bring things up to what you're talking about, became a controversy in 1828 with the murder of Captain William Morgan. Now, Captain William Morgan broke away from a Masonic group in upstate New York. He wrote a book exposing Masonry at the time. It created a national uproar. There was a huge reaction against Masonry. He pointed out, he published the oath, which is really a nasty piece of stuff. Your bowels will be ripped out and your body will be torn to the four winds, and you'll be buried in a shallow grave on the beach, and you'll be beaten if you dare ever betray the oath of the Masonry. And he was murdered. And then, of course, the reaction to that was the creation of America's first third party, the anti-Masonic party, that did actually a lot of good. I mean, John Quincy Adams was an anti-Mason, and they brought up awareness about this sort of tendency towards secret establishment and secretiveness that wasn't healthy. They created the nation's first primaries, the nation's first national conventions, and eventually they morphed into the Whig Party. So that's what I know about Morgan. What do you have on that?
Well, you summed that up pretty well. There was another incident that coincided with that, which was the assassination of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith broke his oaths and converted them into what is now the basis of the Mormon. And they were so mortified over that they had him jailed on superfluous reasons, and then went in front of everybody looking and shot him at point blank range right in the face in his jail cell as punishment. And since
Joseph Smith was the founder of the of the Mormon Church, which I understand, and I'm not here to criticize the Mormon Church. I think there's a lot to admire there, but it's built and created on Masonic lines. It's very secretive. It has an inner portico. Even like if you're not a Mormon, you're not even allowed to go in one of their buildings. I mean, one of their churches, and then you have to enter it. You get degrees. Eventually, you become like a high level Mormon bishop. My understanding, and it's strictly rumor, I don't know this, is that Mitt Romney is part of that. But
that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, so that is that connected to the American Masonry? Would you say?
Well, ever since his assassination, I would say no, because the Mormon Church and the Freemason establishment have a very, very strained, we'll say, relationship. Mormons don't like Masons at all.
Okay.
Because they killed their prophet.
Right.
And Masons, I'm pretty sure the feeling is mutual. They don't like to even do business with anybody who has the slightest shred of a doubt of them.
All right. So since the assassinations of both Joseph Smith and Captain Morgan, Masonry was really on the ropes after that, but apparently it made somewhat of a comeback. Give us the trajectory of how Masonry, if Masonry, and how it became predominant in the high levels of power in the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting because basically, as you mentioned, the formation of the anti-Masonic Party, et cetera, they were essentially run out of underground, and they remained that way for the brunt of the 1800s until, oh God, and I'm going to botch up this date here. It was 1880 something. Being underground, suddenly they formed what is called the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry out of Charleston, South Carolina. And subsequently they later moved to Washington, D.C., where they remain today. But before we get into that, the man who was responsible for all this was Confederate General Albert Pike.
I was asking about him. Morals and Dogma, right?
Yes. Well, Morals and Dogma was a plagiarism. It was actually a ripoff of a book called Dogma and Ritual, written by Eliphas Levi. What Albert Pike did was he went in a time in a world where didn't have internet, didn't really have ways to effectively communicate with the other continents. He went on a trip to France. He soaked up as an American Mason, gained access and soaked up as much as he could from the actual authentic rituals over there from the, as you mentioned, Grand Orient of France, and brought them back and conned the American Freemasons at the time, saying, to paraphrase, I've been over to Europe, I've been on a fact-finding mission, I have uncovered all of these previously unknown degrees, so I'm bringing them back to you, aren't I great? And they believed this, and they took these degrees and formed what is called the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which then rebranded it and brought it back up from underground and back into daily life.
And that's why we have in many American cities, particularly in Massachusetts, where I am, you've got Masonic lodges. And and it's interesting to note that architecturally, you'll see that the windows are all black. You can't see in it. Yes. And they have the black and white checkered floors. And, it's still a very secret group. But most people, I think, who are members of Masonic lodges, they don't really have any idea what we're talking about here. It's more like a fraternal group. I mean, you've got a brotherhood, you've got a sisterhood, you've got you go there for social reasons, you go there for business reasons. I don't know, if you're a salesman, you might sell something, whatever. And it's a way to get connected to your community. It gives you support and infrastructure. If you want to run for office, you can. Masons will provide what's called in-kind support, which means donations and stuffing envelopes and knocking on doors. So, people, it has a structure. But what you're saying, James, is that on the inner part of that structure are people who are, when you get to the higher degrees, that's where you end up with some major secrets. And that's where only people who are initiated and who appear to be willing to accept those higher degrees and all that information, they're accepted into that degree. So is that right in terms of what's going on there?
Oh, completely. I'll throw you one better. There are slews of Masonic lodges all over America that when you look at the Constitution of Freemasonry and their own rules and laws and oaths and so forth, a lodge is supposed to be open to anyone eligible to join. However, we have lodges that are by invitation only. A good example of that would be Tranquility Lodge number 2000 in Houston, Texas. And you are only invited to join that lodge if you are an employee of NASA.
I see. So, and then I think that it's safe to say that in lodges where you're free to join, you don't get beyond maybe the first or second degree unless there's approval, unless the people in the inner core decide that you're going to be tapped. In other words, you're not a witting member. You're just there sort of to go to the, to bring the Christmas parties and whatnot.
Let's dissect quickly a famous quote. The moon landing. Houston, the eagle has landed.
Uh-huh.
What that really meant was they had just planted a Scottish Rite flag and chartered Tranquility Lodge on the moon. Because all the astronauts were Masons.
So this is the Masonic Lodge that is in the inside of NATO. Now, are there Masonic lodges on the inside of other government agencies and powerfully influential groups? I mean, do they run certain colleges or that kind of thing?
Well, you have fraternal orders inside of colleges, like at Yale. You have Book and Key, Book and Snake,
Skull and Bones.
Yes.
Now,
So
that brings me to an issue. Are they connected to anything Masonic, or is it, or are these all like basically
yes,
independent players?
Yes, but it's all super off the books.
Oh, okay, because there's all this stuff about Skull and Bones that's interesting. It was Anthony Sutton, who was a fellow at the Hoover Institute, who wrote the book called America's Secret Establishment about Skull and Bones, and he points out that they're very influential. I believe that he makes the argument that that was the Illuminati imported into the United States in 1848, around the time of the revolutions.
Yes, which, going back to your reference on George Washington, he wrote several letters on his deathbed warning about this. So I've always concluded that Washington, yeah, he was a super Mason at one time, but I think by the end of his life, he realized the direction it was going and was quite perturbed by that.
Right. And now let's bring things up till today. Where are things, and and then I want to talk about you, James, and what's happened with you, because your experience is very interesting. But where do you, to put it mildly, where is the Masonic establishment today? How influential are they, and where is their influence most wielded?
Well, I would say, to get this out of the way quickly, Europe is pretty much unscathed. They've remained the same. They don't seem to have the problems that they do over here. Now, here, as I mentioned, there's this contingent that would like to see the bloodline and legacy type factors run out of it, because you're dealing with guys who, like you mentioned, get into it because they think this will be a great way to corner the market, get ahead in business in their community or politics or whatever, and not all of them are of the bloodline. So they have a lot of contempt for those who are, and that's where the divide kind of started. Many years ago, about 15 years ago when I first got involved in it, I had heard whispers of this, and they used to call it the quiet, silent war of York versus Scottish Rite. But now it's evolved into something much bigger and more sinister.
So you have the two competing Masonic lodges, or are they both under the same roof?
Well, in a lot of cases, in cities and whatever, based on their real estate, a lot are under the same roof, but they are not under the same management.
Now, should we be concerned that high-level government officials and appointed and elected are Masons?
Oh, of course. John F. Kennedy stated that concern in 1961.
In that very famous speech, which should be read by everyone, and it's been speculated that it had everything to do with his assassination. Not that we can prove that, but he did speak to a group called the American Journalists Association in New York, and it's an amazing. You can hear it on YouTube. It's there. It's not. I'm not making this up. He says we have to be concerned with secret societies, that they are very, very pernicious in this country, and that we have to. It creates a certain level of corruption and dishonesty. And we should read that speech, or play that, because that's absolutely amazing.
Yes, he references the secret oaths and the secret proceedings, yes.
Yes, exactly. It's incredible.
I couldn't agree more. You have a definite conflict of interest there. If you're a public servant serving the American government in some sort of local, state, or federal capacity, as far as the Freemasons are concerned, the oaths you take with them supersede the oaths you took with public office, and that is in those oaths.
It supersedes the Constitution. It supersedes even your oath to your wife. It's everything. It's the only. When you take that oath, you're like literally owned by the Masons. That's why Captain Morgan was murdered. And let's give to give an example of how bad this could be. And again, it may be harmless. I don't think it is. But what happens if you have a judge who is a Mason and the defendant before him is a Mason? That defendant might get off because the judge. What? Excuse me? Exactly. Or you can have a police chief who's a Mason, and he might let somebody go, and because they're a Mason, they give them a Masonic handshake. I'm just pointing out that you have this kind of thing going on with the secret alliance of the secret fraternity, and people are loyal to each other sometimes over the interests of the country, over the interests of their own constituents. They're not doing their jobs. I mean, it's a corrupting element there. When you have that kind of loyalty to a group, that's so sworn that you can have some very bad people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could have had some major criminals. I don't know. Was Bernard Madoff a Mason? He probably was.
I mean, just here in Dallas alone, you have all over America lodges that are entirely cop lodges. Like here in Dallas, there's one named East Dallas Lodge. Meets at the Scottish Rite building downtown in the basement once a month. And it is all cops. You cannot join unless you are law enforcement.
So that results in somewhat of this idea of omerta, that you're not supposed to blow the whistle on a fellow cop if they're a bad cop, because it would violate.
The current Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Texas right now as we speak is a man named Wendell P. Miller. Wendell P. Miller, formerly, before accepting that job, was the president of the Texas State Troopers Association. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And James, talk a little bit about what has happened with you and the Masons.
Well, I left mainly, there were multiple reasons, but the vast sweeping majority reason was that it was an uncomfortable situation because I was 28. I'm working in an environment full of 65-plus-year-old men, and pardon the language here, but they sort of decided, the consensus is that I was sort of to be this passed-around fuckboy, if you will, and there was a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of emotional abuse that went along with that, and I had enough. I reached a breaking point, and I left.
Now, is that something that's standard practice in Masonic lodges?
I think one has to question what a group of men are doing, meeting so often when they could be better spending that time, say, I don't know, with their wives, their kids. What are they doing at all hours of the night at that lodge? And then when you break down, and actually the biggest reason why they don't like it when their oaths and rituals are revealed is because when you start to read it, say like you're treating it as a script for a play, and you're reading this and you're thinking, this sounds an awful lot like 50 Shades of Grey, just with the language.
No, I don't want to, be casting broad dispersions here, because a lot of people, I know some people who are into Masonry. I have a cousin who's into Masonry. I don't think that he's involved with that. I don't know. But I don't want
to. Because there's a divide. We have what we call the porch Masons, who are sort of the lemmings who keep the system going, who have the charity events, who keep these local blue lodges running. But the chance of them actually ever going up the ladder and getting into 32nd, 33rd degree positions and beyond, because that's just a gateway into the beyond of the by invitation only realm that we've mentioned. They don't ever stand an ice cube's chance in hell of getting there, because that is strictly bloodline. That is strictly who was your father, who was your grandfather, et cetera, et cetera. And that's also a gateway into the intelligence community, which it was born out of in the first place.
Right. Well, that's another question. The CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, all of these agencies were set up in 1948 by an executive act by President Truman, who was a very proud Mason, and that's become predominant in our establishment. It's now. There's a professor at Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I interviewed Michael Glennon, who wrote a book called The Double Government. And again, this is not some guy that's into right-wing conspiracy. He's Fletcher School. He was a Senate legal counsel under, I think, Clinton. And his book talks about this phenomenon, the secretiveness of these agencies starting in 1948, how they raise money using black accounts as opposed to officially designated congressional money, and how they've become. We're talking about the millions of employees at this point, trillions of dollars. They're all over the world. They have their hooks into just about everything.
Yes.
And this is what President Trump is talking about when he talks about the deep state, in my opinion.
He is referencing that, yes. Though, in my own opinion, I think it would be next to impossible for Trump, assuming he does not have those connections, to execute his job as president successfully without taking in those influences, because they're already underneath every rock at the White House.
Well, I mean, we don't know whether or not he does, and there are a lot of rocks at the White House that have turned out to be covering up some pretty bad people, and that goes. That's been a big problem for Trump. How to to get rid of those rocks and how to drain the swamp, as he says. I mean, his success in that regard is limited, but at least he's talking about it. At least he's trying.
Well, again, assuming that he is wholeheartedly trying, and that is the intent, I struggle to believe that it's actually possible at this point.
Well, that's not. I mean, it's a pessimistic view, but I hate to say it, but I kind of agree to somewhat reluctantly. Is the Masonic Lodge satanic?
By itself, with nobody standing inside of it, no. But the problem starts when, and they won't tell you this part in the recruitment, blah, blah, blah. But when you join, you have to take your oaths with a hand on the book of your faith. Now, that means anything. That on the one hand, it's flowery. It means that you can join as a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. But then on the other hand, they are certainly full of members who have joined with their hands placed firmly on the Satanic Bible or the Book of Thelema written by Aleister Crowley. And that is acceptable, yes, in Freemason lodges. They accept that.
So, right. I mean, it's kind of a they do this under the guise that we're non-sectarian, that we're not adhering to any particular religion or belief.
Right.
And are they connected to some of these pedophile scandals?
Oh, yeah, just the Dallas Scottish Rite alone. There was a huge pedophilia scandal to do with the youth group D. Malay in the 1980s. They subsequently cleared all of that material, any reminders, pictures, plaques that gave any reference to the individuals involved out, and they moved them across the street on Young to a building that they will tell you is abandoned and you can't go in it because it's got asbestos, but that's a lie. You can't go in that building because you go in there and you start to see all of what happened that's been stored away in the 1980s here in Dallas. So yes, because again, in those oaths, you are supposed to cover for and lie for and protect your brothers. They say specifically, the way it reads in the oath is murder and treason alone accepted, but these left at my option. And when they say something's at your option, it's not really at your option. It's at the pressure of your peers in that lodge.
And so it is definitely at least a recipe for some major corruption, major activity of an immoral nature. What about the Bohemian Grove?
The Bohemian Grove Bohemian Club is not officially tied to Freemasonry. However, I think if you were to go through a member list, if they were to ever publish one, you would find that the members are. Because again, it's all male, and the prominent types that get invited to join that are. I received an invitation approximately 2 years ago to join, and I declined. When they asked why, I said, well, gentlemen, I can't think of one good reason or one good thing that could come of my joining that. It's not my thing anymore. I'm retired from secret society goings-ons.
Well, and what's James? What's gone on with you since you have retired? I understand that there's been some negative repercussions. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but what's happening?
Well, it's like a soap opera. It goes on and on for decades, I guess, and sometimes new characters are brought in, old ones die off, but the story continues. My life is the furthest thing from easy or put together. I spend more time cleaning up the messes that they make for me than actually being able to live it. And it just seems like I go from one disaster to the next that are engineered. A lot of people have, over time, and just the sheer amount of time this has gone on, have become a little skeptical, thinking, well, how much of this is self-induced? How much of this is you egging them on and kind of asking for more from them? Well, a year ago, the Grand Lodge of California sent a representative to accost me in the middle of West Hollywood, and through clever manipulation of the conversation, I got this guy to admit out loud in an hour-long diatribe that, yes, they have been targeting me, yes, they've done this, been responsible for that, messed this up for me, et cetera, et cetera. Well, about an hour into this, it dawned on this idiot that I was recording him. And once he realized that, he freaked out, ran off. Suddenly, a guy with a gun started chasing me down Melrose Avenue, and I had to run to the West Hollywood Sheriff's Department just to stop it. And then I shortly after left town for a bit, and I went up to Portland and did some work there. And I had that recording. I put that recording on YouTube just to jerk their pants down once again, which was vindicating for me, because anybody who had ever doubted me then had hardcore audio proof that no, I was not imagining this, no, I was not exaggerating this, that this was indeed what has been going on, is going on. And in so publishing that, it let up for a little while. But of course, now that I'm back in Dallas on family business, I know that they're very upset with that, which is why I'm keeping a low profile.
Well, you're keeping a low profile, but here you are on YouTube. Right. I mean, so
from
you're
an undisclosed location, Chuck.
Yeah. I mean, and I've changed my name, but I did. But you continue to have concerns. You continue to feel that with evidence, that you're being looked at, spied on, followed.
Yes.
Yeah. And that yet you continue the work of exposing this, what I think is accurately called a conspiracy that reaches up into the very highest levels of our society. Do you have any?
It goes higher than that, and it goes further down the rabbit hole than you could possibly imagine. You see this ring I'm wearing?
Yeah.
Let me try and get a.
Yeah, put up. Here. Let me see if I can get a. Oh yeah. Oh boy, that looks like a star.
Well, it's more than that. This is the ring that Princess Diana was wearing during her crash that Dodi Al-Fayed gave her as an engagement ring.
Oh. Yeah, I've heard some pretty woolly things about that incident, and that's troubling. Yeah, that's not good. Anyway, James, what else do you want to talk about? I'm kind of speechless.
I have that effect on interviews.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm like starting to bite my nails here. What else is going on?
I mean, right now I'm dealing with a very sordid family thing. There's my aunt died New Year's Eve. She was the woman who basically raised me because my mother was, and she has an estate valued at $20 million, 18 of which is missing, and I am here conducting a forensic accounting, and the intent being to turn over my findings to the feds, because my family here in Dallas is mob connected, and I've just about had it with them as much as I had it with the Masons back in 2010.
Well, listen, James, be careful. I mean, Godspeed, that everything goes well, and I hope that stay in touch with me and with my audience. You're welcome anytime to talk about whatever's going on. We didn't even discuss the issue of the mob and all of that. That's a whole different ball of wax. But for the purpose of the program, I mean, I think you're doing a great job exposing what can only be described as a major source of corruption in this country, and I hope you continue to do it.
Thank you, Chuck. That means a lot to me, and it's only through your viewers and the other audiences I've been in front of that has actually managed, strange as it may sound, to not only give me the reassurance I need emotionally, but to, in a way, safeguard me. I mean, like Julian Assange said, and I think even Edward Snowden too, you know, if you don't come out and say these things and you just run and hide in your little hole, then, I mean, that gives them the advantage. And then they have every opportunity to bump you off, and no one would be the wiser or even ever probably end up hearing about what happened.
No, I think you're absolutely right. In a way, you're inoculating yourself by being public and by exposing. I mean, this is what Whittaker Chambers did after he broke with the Communist Party. You know, he put away the microfilm and things to prove that he had managed all those people in the FDR administration. And then when what hit the fan, he was able to provide them. I mean, and it resulted in a major exposure of a conspiracy inside the U.S. government. So, and they wanted to knock him off too. So they knew he had this little insurance policy. So, you're doing the right thing by coming up and talking about it. And please continue to do so and be in touch with me.
Thank you so much, Chuck. And I know it's been difficult to get a hold of me the past couple months. I apologize for that.
Not at all.
It's been wonky.
Well, just be well and watch yourself and be careful.
Thank you so much. And you too.
All right, James. Take care.
Thank you.
All right.